Before you continue reading this incredible story, we want to ask you to please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. By doing this, you will get notifications whenever we upload new emotional stories that will touch your heart, remind you about the goodness in people. Thank you for your support, and now, let's begin this amazing story. The morning sun filtered through the streets of London as tourists gathered outside the magnificent palace gates. It was a typical busy day with people from all around the world coming to witness the royal guards in their iconic red uniforms and tall black hats. The guards stood perfectly still, their faces blank and emotionless, just as they had been trained to do for many years. Among the crowd that day was Marcus Wellington, a wealthy businessman from New York. He wore an expensive designer suit and carried himself with an air of superiority that made others around him uncomfortable. Marcus had made his fortune in real estate and felt that money gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. He had no respect for traditions, culture, or the feelings of others. Marcus was walking through the crowd with his family, showing off and complaining about everything around him. The palace was too old. The guards looked silly in their uniforms, and the whole thing was a waste of his time. His wife Jennifer tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. He was in a terrible mood because his business deal had fallen through that morning, and he wanted to take out his anger on someone. As Marcus got closer to the royal guard standing at the gate, something inside him snapped. The guard, a young man named James, who was only 23 years old, stood motionless as he had been ordered to do. James had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years and took great pride in his job. He loved his country and honored his position with dignity and respect. Marcus stopped right in front of James and started mocking him loudly. He laughed at the uniform, made fun of the guard's height, and spoke disrespectfully about the entire British royal tradition. People around them began to notice the commotion, and some looked uncomfortable. A few tourists tried to move away, not wanting to be part of this rude display. But James remained still. He had been trained to ignore provocations and maintain his composure no matter what happened. This was his duty, and he would not break his professional code. His eyes stayed forward, looking straight ahead as if Marcus didn't even exist. This made Marcus even angrier. His face turned red, and veins began to show on his neck. How dare this person ignore him? How dare this guard not react to his insults? Marcus felt disrespected and embarrassed that the guard would not even acknowledge him. He was used to people responding to his rudeness with fear or anger. But James gave him nothing. Without thinking about what he was doing, Marcus did something terrible. He spat directly on James's uniform, the saliva landing on the young guard's chest. The crowd gasped in horror. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Everyone was shocked by what they had just witnessed. Some people covered their mouths with their hands. A few tourists pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Jennifer, Marcus's wife, felt her face burn with shame. She couldn't believe what her husband had just done. She felt embarrassed not just for herself, but for Marcus too, even though she was furious with him. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. Their teenage daughter looked down at her feet, unable to make eye contact with anyone around her. James's jaw clenched slightly, his hands squeezed into fists, but he still did not move. He did not attack Marcus. He did not yell at him. He simply stood there, processing what had just happened to him. Inside, he was hurt and angry, but his training kept him in place. He had a job to do, and that job was to guard the palace entrance with honor and dignity. The crowd around them grew quiet. People whispered to each other about what they had seen. Some were angry at Marcus for his behavior. Others were amazed by James's control and professionalism. Nobody expected what was about to happen next. Something that would change everyone's perspective in just a few seconds and leave the entire crowd stunned beyond belief. What happened next was completely unexpected and caught everyone by surprise. Just as the tension seemed unbearable and people waited to see if James would finally react, something extraordinary took place. An elderly woman from the crowd suddenly stepped forward. She was in her 70s, with white hair and kind eyes that had seen many years of life. The woman, whose name was Margaret, had been visiting London with her daughter and grandchildren. She had witnessed the entire shameful incident. Margaret was not a tall woman, and she moved slowly with the help of a walking stick. But she had the courage of someone much younger and stronger. She pushed through the crowd until she stood right next to James. Everyone watched in silence as Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a handkerchief. Without saying a single word, she gently cleaned the spit from James's uniform with tenderness and care. Her actions spoke louder than any words could have. She was showing this young guard that not everyone in the world was cruel and disrespectful. She was telling him, without using her voice, that his sacrifice and dedication were valued and appreciated. Tears began to roll down James's cheeks. For 3 years he had stood at his post, ignored by most people who walked past him. People took pictures with him, made fun of him, and treated him as if he were just a statue or decoration. But this elderly woman, this complete stranger, was showing him compassion and respect in front of everyone. Her simple act of kindness broke through his professional walls. James tried to compose himself, but he couldn't. The emotion was too strong. He had been holding everything inside for so long, doing his duty without complaint. And this moment released something deep within him. His shoulders trembled slightly, and he had to take a deep breath to maintain any sense of control. Margaret patted his arm gently and gave him a warm smile. She didn't need to know his story to understand that he was a good person doing an important job. Her daughter came up beside her, and together, they stood as a symbol of humanity and kindness in a moment. Where cruelty had tried to dominate, the crowd's energy shifted completely. What had been a moment of shame and anger now transformed into something powerful and meaningful. People began to applaud. The applause started slowly, with just a few hands clapping, but it grew louder and louder until it became a thundering sound that echoed through the palace gates. Marcus stood frozen, watching this incredible scene unfold. He suddenly realized what he had done. He saw the love and respect the crowd was showing to James. He understood that his money, his expensive suit, and his arrogant attitude meant absolutely nothing compared to the value of human kindness and dignity. His face went pale, and shame washed over him like a tidal wave. Other tourists joined Margaret's act of kindness. A young woman came forward and adjusted James's uniform, making sure it was perfectly straight. An old man shook his hand firmly and thanked him for his service. Children held flowers they had been carrying and gently placed them at James's feet. The entire crowd had become united in showing support and appreciation for this young guard. Jennifer grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him away from the scene. She was embarrassed and angry. She couldn't look at the people around them who were now viewing her husband with disgust. Their daughter was crying. It's not from sadness, but from feeling ashamed of her father's actions. Security officers approached Marcus and asked him to leave the area immediately. His family was escorted away from the palace gates, away from the crowd that had just witnessed his worst moment. As they walked away, the sound of the applause continued, growing even louder, as if the crowd was celebrating the removal of negativity and the triumph of goodness. James stood there, surrounded by the kindness of strangers, his uniform now cleaned, and his heart now full. What had started as the worst moment of his career had transformed into something that would change his life forever. He understood now that there were good people in the world, people who recognized the importance of respect and human decency. The incident was far from over, and the consequences for Marcus were only just beginning. The video of the incident went viral on social media within hours. Someone in the crowd had recorded the entire event. From Marcus's disrespectful behavior through to Margaret's incredible act of compassion, the footage spread across the internet like wildfire, reaching millions of people around the world who were moved by what they saw. News outlets picked up the story and began reporting on it. Major television stations and newspapers wanted to tell the world about the elderly woman who had shown such extraordinary kindness, and about the young guard who had maintained his dignity despite being treated so terribly. The story was shared thousands and thousands of times, the people commenting about the beauty of human compassion. James became an unexpected hero overnight. His social media accounts were flooded with messages from people all over the globe, thanking him for his service and expressing their admiration for how he handled such a difficult situation. People sent him gifts, supportive letters, and well wishes. Families gathered around their screens to watch the video and use it as a teaching moment for their children about respect and kindness. But the viral nature of the video meant that Marcus's identity was also revealed. News reporters began investigating who the man was who had committed such an outrageous act. Within a few days, they had discovered his name, his business, and his reputation. Journalists contacted his company, his business partners, and people who knew him personally to get their side of the story. The consequences for Marcus were severe and immediate. Major corporations that had been planning to do business with him pulled out of their deals. His reputation was destroyed in professional circles. People who had respected him as a successful businessman now saw him as a man without character or morals. His employees watched the video and began to question whether they really wanted to work for someone capable of such cruelty. Jennifer filed for divorce. She couldn't stay married to a man who had embarrassed their family so publicly and whose actions had revealed something so dark about his character. She packed her things and moved out, taking their daughter with her. Their teenage daughter struggled in school because other students had seen the video and knew who she was. She had to change schools to escape the shame that followed her everywhere. Marcus tried to apologize. He issued statements to the media saying that what he had done was wrong and that he regretted it deeply. He offered to pay money to James and to donate large sums to charity in an attempt to repair his image, but none of it worked. The public couldn't forgive him because they felt his apologies were only motivated by what had happened to him. Not by genuine remorse for hurting another person. He hired expensive lawyers and tried to have the video removed from the internet, but by then it was too late. It had been copied and shared too many times. He received hate messages on social media. People recognized him on the street and confronted him about his behavior. His life became a nightmare of his own making. James, on the other hand, received an official commendation from the royal palace for maintaining his composure and dignity. He was promoted and given a better position that didn't require him to stand outside in all weather conditions. The royal family personally thanked him and made clear that they appreciated his service and his character. Margaret became something of a celebrity herself. Talk shows wanted to interview her about her motivation for stepping forward. She gave several interviews where she spoke about the importance of standing up for what is right and showing kindness to those who are suffering. Her message resonated with millions of people who felt inspired by her bravery. The incident sparked important conversations around the world about respect, dignity, and how we treat workers in public service positions. People began to think differently about the guards they saw, the janitors who cleaned their streets, and the service workers they encountered every day. They started to realize that these people deserved respect and kindness, not mockery and disrespect. Schools used the video as an educational tool to teach children about empathy and respect for others. Parents showed their kids the footage and explained why Marcus's behavior was so wrong and why Marguerite's response was so important. The story became a lesson in humanity for a whole generation. 6 months had passed since the incident at the palace gates. Marcus sat alone in a small apartment, far away from the luxury penthouse he once owned. His businesses had collapsed, his friends had abandoned him, and his family no longer spoke to him. He spent his days watching the video repeatedly, trying to understand how his life had fallen apart so quickly. He had hired a therapist to help him work through his anger and to understand why he had become such an angry, bitter person. Through their sessions, Marcus began to realize that his rudeness had nothing to do with the guard and everything to do with his own emptiness inside. He had spent his entire life chasing money and success, but he had never developed genuine relationships or found meaning in his work. The therapist suggested that Marcus reach out and try to make genuine amends, not to fix his reputation, but to become a better person. Marcus knew it was unlikely that James would accept an apology, but he felt he had to try. He also knew he couldn't face James in person because that would only bring back painful memories for the guard. Marcus wrote a letter. He spent weeks crafting the right words, trying to express his true remorse without making excuses or asking for forgiveness. He wrote about how he had been suffering since that day, not because his life had fallen apart, but because he finally understood the hurt he had caused to an innocent person. He took full responsibility for his actions and admitted that no apology could undo What he had done? He sent the letter to the palace. Addressed to James, not knowing if it would ever reach him or if James would even want to read it, Marcus didn't expect a response. He had accepted that he might never have the chance to truly apologize to the man he had wronged. Meanwhile, James had been living a completely different life. He had been promoted to a supervisory position that involved training new guards and overseeing palace security. He had gained confidence from the incident and the support he received. He had also become something of an advocate for workers' rights and the proper treatment of service industry employees. James received Marcus's letter at his office. When he first saw the envelope, he felt a wave of emotions wash over him. His initial instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it carefully. As James read Marcus's words, he felt something shifting inside him. The letter was not asking for forgiveness. It was not trying to excuse or minimize what had happened. Instead, it was a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a demonstration of real growth. Marcus had written about taking responsibility, about his own struggles, and about understanding how his actions had affected another human being. James realized that holding on to anger would only hurt himself. He had already moved forward in his life and found meaning in his work. Staying angry at Marcus wouldn't change anything or make him feel better. Instead, it would just keep him tied to a negative moment in his past. He decided to respond to Marcus's letter. James's response was brief but powerful. He wrote that he appreciated Marcus's apology and that he had witnessed Marcus's life falling apart through the media coverage. James expressed that he didn't take pleasure in Marcus's suffering. Instead, he wrote that he hoped Marcus would use this time to rebuild himself as a better person. He also wrote that forgiveness was a journey. This letter was a step on that journey for both of them. Marcus received James's letter and broke down crying. For the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. Someone he had wronged so badly had given him a chance at redemption. He understood that he couldn't go back to his old life, but maybe he could build a new one. One based on kindness and genuine human connection, rather than money and status, James showed Margaret the entire exchange of letters. Margaret, who had become a close friend of James since the incident, smiled knowingly. She had always believed in the power of forgiveness and redemption. She understood that people were capable of great cruelty, but they were also capable of great transformation. She believed that every person deserved a second chance if they were truly willing to change. The two of them, James and Margaret, decided to reach out to Marcus together. They invited him to meet with them, not in anger or confrontation, but simply as three people who had been forever connected by a single moment in time. Marcus was terrified of this meeting, not knowing what to expect or how they would treat him. The meeting took place in a quiet coffee shop far away from the palace and away from any crowds. James and Margaret sat at a small table, waiting nervously for Marcus to arrive. Neither of them knew exactly how this conversation would go or what Marcus would say. They had decided to meet him out of compassion, but they were also cautious about what his true intentions might be. Marcus walked into the coffee shop with his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He spotted James and Margaret and walked slowly toward their table. His hands were shaking and his heart was pounding in his chest. When he reached them, he couldn't bring himself to sit down immediately. He stood there for a moment, gathering the courage to face them. Marcus looked at James and said something that surprised them both. He apologized not just for spitting on him, but for every rude comment he had made that day and every moment he had made someone else feel small and insignificant. He talked about how his behavior that day had been a reflection of his broken soul, not of James's worth or character. He explained how seeing the video had forced him to confront the kind of person he had become and how much he regretted it. Then Marcus turned to Margaret and thanked her. He said that her act of kindness had saved not just James but also his own life in a way. She had shown him that there were good people in the world, people capable of extraordinary compassion, and that made him want to become a better person too. He explained that her response to his cruelty was the moment he realized he needed to change completely. James listened carefully to everything Marcus said. He could hear the sincerity in his voice and see the genuine remorse in his eyes. James had spent months in therapy learning about forgiveness and healing, and he recognized when someone was truly trying to make amends. He reached across the table and shook Marcus's hand. James told Marcus that he forgave him. Not because what Marcus had done was acceptable or could ever be justified, but because James understood that holding on to anger was only keeping him connected to that painful moment. By forgiving Marcus, James was freeing himself from the burden of carrying that hurt anymore. It was an act of self-love as much as an act of compassion toward Marcus. Margaret smiled warmly and reached out to put her hand on Marcus's arm. She told him that she had witnessed many things in her 70-some years on Earth, and she had learned that people were capable of tremendous growth and change if they were willing to do the work. She said she believed in him and that she was proud of him for taking responsibility and truly trying to become a better person. The three of them sat together for hours, talking about life, about what matters most, and about how one moment can change everything. Marcus shared stories about his childhood and how his pursuit of money had come from a deep fear of being insignificant or powerless. James talked about why he loved his job as a guard and what it meant to him to serve his country with honor. Margaret shared wisdom about the importance of seeing the humanity in every person we encounter. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. The three of them began to laugh together. They shared jokes and stories, and for a brief moment, they were no longer connected by shame and regret, but by genuine human connection and understanding. Marcus felt lighter than he had in months. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life into something meaningful before they left the coffee shop. Marcus asked if there was anything he could do to make a real difference in the world. He had lost most of his money, but he still had some savings, and more importantly, he now had humility and a genuine desire to help others. James and Margaret looked at each other and smiled, because they had been hoping he would ask this question. They told Marcus about a foundation they had recently started in James's name, an organization dedicated to improving working conditions and respect for service industry workers around the world. They explained that it had been difficult to fund, as neither of them had significant financial resources, but they believed deeply in the mission. Marcus immediately volunteered to help. He offered to use his remaining wealth to get the foundation off the ground and then promised to work alongside James and Margaret to build it into something truly impactful. He wanted to dedicate his remaining years to helping ensure that other workers wouldn't have to face the kind of disrespect he had shown James. The three of them left the coffee shop that day as unexpected partners in a mission that would change many lives. What had started as a shameful moment of cruelty had been transformed into an opportunity for redemption and positive change. Marcus, James, and Margaret had become an unlikely team, bound together by the power of forgiveness and the possibility of transformation. 2 years had passed since that meaningful meeting at the coffee shop. The foundation that Marcus, James, and Margaret had started together had grown far beyond what any of them had imagined. They called it the Dignity in Service Foundation, and its mission was to promote respect and fair treatment for service. Workers around the world, the foundation had established training programs for companies on how to properly treat and respect their employees. They had created educational materials for schools about the importance of valuing all forms of work. They had also started a scholarship program for children of service workers, helping them pursue higher education and better opportunities in life. Marcus had become the executive director of the foundation, using his business skills and knowledge to make it successful. But this time, he was motivated not by money or personal gain, but by a genuine desire to make the world a better place. He worked alongside James and Margaret every single day, and they had become his closest friends and greatest sources of support. James continued his work as a royal guard, but he had also become the public face of the foundation. He traveled to different countries, speaking about his experience and encouraging people to treat service workers with dignity and respect. His story inspired millions of people. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was famous, but because they could see in him the power of choosing to respond to cruelty with grace. Margaret, now in her late 70s, served as the moral compass of the foundation. Her wisdom and compassion guided every decision the organization made. She became something of a grandmother figure to both James and Marcus. She reminded them constantly of why their work mattered and encouraged them to never lose sight of their mission. Even when the work became difficult, one day, a young woman approached James at one of his speaking events. She told him that she had seen the video of the incident when she was in middle school. She explained that it had changed her entire perspective on how she treated other people. She had been a mean and disrespectful teenager before seeing the video, but watching Margaret's act of kindness and James's dignity had inspired her to become a better person. This young woman had studied hard, gone to college, and was now working as a counselor helping troubled youth. She told James that she often shared his story with her clients as a way to teach them about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of treating others with respect. James hugged her and cried tears of joy. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen when he decided to tell his story publicly. Stories like this one came too. James and Marcus regularly. People wrote letters explaining how the incident had inspired them to change their careers, to pursue jobs where they could help others, or simply to treat people around them with more kindness and respect. The ripples created by that single moment at the palace gates had spread across the entire world in ways that nobody could have predicted. Marcus's relationship with his ex-wife and daughter had also improved over time. They saw how genuinely he had changed and how dedicated he was to becoming a better person. While Jennifer did not take him back as a spouse, she did re-establish a relationship with him as a co-parent and eventually as a friend. Their daughter came to respect him again, seeing that her father had taken responsibility for his mistakes and was working to make amends. Daughter eventually joined the foundation's board and helped develop their educational programs for young people. She spoke about her experience, explaining how ashamed she had felt of her father's behavior and how proud she felt of his transformation. Her story showed others that transformation was possible, even for those who had fallen the lowest. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, the three main characters gathered at the palace gates where everything had started. There were cameras and reporters present, but this time, it wasn't because of shame or scandal. Instead, the world's media had come to celebrate the incredible work that Marcus, James, and Margaret had accomplished together. The royal palace had officially recognized the Dignity and Service Foundation and made a donation to support their work. They unveiled a plaque at the gates honoring all service workers and reminding people to treat them with respect and kindness. The plaque included a quote from Margaret that read, "Every person deserves to be seen, valued, and treated with dignity, regardless of their job or social status." Marcus stood at that same spot where he had committed his shameful act 5 years earlier. He looked at James standing beside him in his Royal Guard uniform, and he thought about how different everything had become. A moment of cruelty had been transformed into a lifetime of purpose and meaning. His life that had once been focused on money and status was now focused on helping others and making a real difference in the world. James looked out at the crowd gathered for the celebration and thought about that day 5 years ago. He remembered the hurt he had felt and how he had questioned his decision to remain composed. But he understood now that his choice to maintain his dignity in that moment had been one of the best decisions of his life. It had led him to a purpose greater than himself. Margaret, standing between the two men, smiled knowing that she had witnessed something truly extraordinary. She had seen a moment of human cruelty transformed into an opportunity for redemption and positive change. She had watched two men who had hurt and been hurt come together to build something beautiful. She knew that this was proof that no situation was ever too broken to be fixed if people were willing to forgive, learn, and grow together. The incident that had once been known around the world as a moment of shame had become a symbol of hope and transformation. Schools taught it as a lesson in dignity and respect. Businesses used it to train their employees about the importance of treating all people with kindness. Families shared it as an example of how one person's choice to act with compassion could inspire millions. What had started as a terrible moment at the palace gates had ultimately become a beautiful story of how humans, despite their flaws and mistakes, were capable of extraordinary growth, forgiveness, and change. It was a reminder that we all have the power to transform ourselves, and that it's never too late to become the best version of ourselves.